Good morning. It's good to see y'all this morning. Good to be in the house of the Lord. And thank God for His goodness and His mercy and His love and His grace. I tell you, we're so undeserving of what He did for us on the cross of Calvary. And I'm so thankful for that today. And I'm glad that He willingly went. You know, He wasn't ready to go. He said, nobody took His life from Him, but He laid it down freely. And if He laid it down, He'd take it up again. Thankful for a Savior and a God like we serve today. And we're going to continue. I guess I'll do the offering real quick. I keep forgetting about that. When I get up here, the money's the furthest thing from my mind. When I get up here, to be honest with you, I told them a long time ago I didn't want nothing to do with that money. I wanted to teach Sunday school, and I still don't want nothing to do with the money. I just want to do what God would have me to do. But let's go ahead and ask the blessing upon this offering. Brother Tony, if I may ask the blessing over the offering for us. Yes. Amen. Listen, we're going to continue, and what we may do today, I know there's some of you, I'm going to say some things that you already know, but maybe there's some that don't. But we're going to try to follow what happens next in line. We're just a couple of weeks away from Easter, and we've been here on the last day or the last night of Jesus' life for some time, the very last night. I don't know, several weeks now. And today what I want to do is we're not really going to go to John 18 to start with, because John 18 doesn't cover a couple of things that I want to cover like I want to. So, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke does. So, and we may read it in more than, I don't really know what we'll do. We may read it more than one gospel, because you remember before I've told you, you kind of have to put the Gospels together to get the complete story. I mean, it kind of tells you a little bit more detail. This tells you a little bit, and this one adds to it. So it's no different with what's going on. Now, in my thinking, now you're going to read something in Luke 22 that makes it sound like Jesus did this before He started to the Garden of Gethsemane. But I really believe that what we're going to talk about this morning happened on the way to the garden, on the walk. That's just me, my personal belief. And I get that out of Matthew 26. And let's look down in verse 30. And we're going to talk about two or three things this morning. One is, and I know the preacher preached last week on Peter in this same area right here. I understand. I remember what he said about the space and the place and the grace. I remember that. I believe it was last Sunday. And we're going to be right in that same area. It's not going to be a little bit different than what he told you, but still it's the same thing, same area in the Bible is all I'm saying. And we're going to talk about, Jesus telling Peter He's going to deny Him. And then we're going to talk about Jesus in the garden. And then we're going to talk about the actual denial of Peter, Lord willing, if we have time. And we'll do a lot out of Matthew, and maybe a little bit out of Luke 22. But in Matthew 26:30 it says, when they had sung an hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. So this is making me think this is the very last thing that they've talked about. In other words, you got to realize this is still the same night. Jesus had just literally washed His disciples' feet an hour or two earlier. Judas has left to go betray Jesus, and it was dark. So that lets us know it's later on in the afternoon, 6, 7, 8 o'clock. I'm not sure of the time. And we know that when Judas went out, according to the Bible, it was dark. So I'm going to say at least 6 o'clock, probably in the afternoon at the earliest. And then Jesus, He washes the feet. They go through all this, and He tells them He's going to be leaving. They're sorry that He's leaving. They don't fully understand what's going on. At this time, they don't know, but they sing a song together. And I believe it's at this point that they begin their walk to Gethsemane. It's just like I say, you can read Luke 22, and it says something to make you think differently. But I don't really think that's what Luke's trying to say, because Matthew and Mark, I believe, both tell us they sung a song and they went out. So this, and this I've been to the Holy Land. Thank the Lord. I've been over where they may have had the Last Supper. I've been in that area, and I've also been to Gethsemane, in the garden where they say where Jesus was. So I've heard 30-minute walk, 45-minute walk. I mean, from where they were at one point. So anyway, this would have happened during the walk. Now I don't understand everything about the Bible like everybody else. But the Garden of Gethsemane had to have some meaning to Jesus, more than I can tell you. I mean, honestly, because I've thought and thought and thought. You know, there's those that believe that Jesus was born where Adam had died and that type of thing. I can't prove that biblically. That's what I think. I've heard stories that Jesus, where Jesus was crucified, that Adam's tomb was under the cross. I mean, I ain't saying it's wrong. I just I don't know. I mean, it's questions I can't answer. It's interesting, but I can't tell you, hey, this is so. I mean, I've heard in the last 20 years they had found the Ark of the Covenant in the area where Jesus was crucified, and there's blood on it with less chromosomes than the average man has. I can't answer that. I mean, I'm just telling you what I've heard and what I've read. I think it's one shy, but it's from the male side, is what I'm trying to say with that. I don't know all that, but the garden had to mean something to God, or something for Jesus to go there. My thinking, is it possible that in Gethsemane is the area where the Garden of Eden was? Possibly. Now, most people say it's in Babylon and Iraq because of the rivers. But this, after a flood, waters can reroute. New rivers can be created. I'm just telling you, it can. Well, if you believe there's a worldwide flood, and I do, I mean, God can reroute. Rivers can reroute naturally, preacher. I mean, they can. But I don't know. But it has a significance that I can't tell you I know what. But I did have this thought in mind. It's back to the garden. Because, see, in the garden is where sin started. And the garden was a place that was a perfect place until man was put in it and man was tempted. And that life like we know it becomes as we know it because of sin. So Jesus is going back to the garden. And I believe he's going back to where it all began. It's got to have some type of significance to that, to the Garden of Eden. I just can't tell you. I don't know what it is. But Jesus is walking, and he's on his way. Verse 31, he is walking, I feel like, and he's on his way to the garden, or back to the garden. And he said this, then saith Jesus unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. Listen, they no doubt, in my mind, they had just had a great supper. I mean, I know we call it the Great Supper, but I mean a great as in wonderful time. Wonderful. I mean, I really believe that maybe God revealed some things to them in this meeting he hadn't up till this time. This is the last thing that Jesus would tell them. Remember I told you before that often the first thing people tell you and the last thing is very, very important. Not that everything else either, but those are sometimes the most important things to the people sharing it. The first thing you say or the last. Well, this is the last thing Jesus would tell them before they reached the garden. The only other thing it'd be is go pray. I mean, that's it. That's what's left. He tells them to pray. But this is the last thing he's telling them. And he's telling them, he said, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered. I mean, and Jesus said, listen, all of you are going to be offended, or maybe not use the word deny, but they're going to be scattered, all of them. And I know we don't know about the rest of them, where they went and what they done. We don't really know. We know more about Peter and John because the Bible tells us about them. Verse 32. But after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. And we know verse 33. Peter answered and said unto him, though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. You know, he's the spokesman of the group and what we've seen through the disciples. And he was probably just talking out loud what the rest of them were maybe thinking. But Peter said, listen, I don't care if all of them leave. I won't never be offended. I won't never leave you. Listen, when you come out of good services or great services and you feel like you can do anything, we get there sometimes. I've told you this from experience. There's 2 times in life you never promise God anything. I've said this. I ain't said it in a while. First of all is when everything is great in your life, because it might not be like that tomorrow. And it's not a good, it's just not a good practice to promise God. The promise God. You can't live up to that when you're on a mountaintop and everything's great. You just can't. That's where Peter was at. Listen, Peter, he didn't realize what was fixing to happen. He just thought it was probably the greatest night of his life, so to speak. And God, I don't care if all of me, I'll never do that. But the other time in your life that you don't ought to promise God nothing is because you're in trouble. And you promise God things. If you'll do this, I'll do that, because you won't live up to that. That's just two good times in your life not to be promising God anything. It's just not. I've often said that. Because we can be in church today, and it can feel good in here, and we can feel the presence of the Lord, and we can do things and say things. But getting them outside the door of this church and living them is a different story. I can get up here this morning and tell you anything I want to tell you and try to make me look good, Preacher David. But at the end of the day, I'm not. And I fail just like you do. And I can never look at him and say, God, I'd never leave. I would want to think if I was put to the test, I could do that. And standing right here this morning, yes, I would say that. But if he was put to the test, I can't answer that. Yeah, I know we all those had good intention. Listen, are you better than Peter that wrote part of the Bible, was one of Jesus' disciples that walked with him? That walked with him face to face for 3.5 years. I mean, listen, we see his miracles, and we see what he does, and we see the works of God and the Spirit that we talked about last week brings us face to face with God. I understand all that. But there'll come that time you'll be put to the test. There'll be times maybe next week that you'll be put to the test. What would really happen? I mean, I know this morning you would say that. Peter was just hours away from doing what he did. Hours. Listen, it's one thing, to say it today, and then next month somebody does the exact opposite. But to say it right now, and 2-3 hours later, we're talking about a short period of time. 4 hours. It was a short period of time. If it was already dark, and he leaves them and goes to pray about an hour each time, from what we gather from Scripture, he said he went away and stayed about the space of an hour. I believe one place that says that. It ain't so many hours between 6 o'clock in the afternoon and 6 o'clock the next morning. It's 12 hours any way you want to do it. So it was less than that, but it was more like probably 4 to 8 probably at max, because they had to try Jesus. They tried him all through the night and all that. So all this had to take place fairly early. But he said, I would never be offended because of you. Verse 34. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, that at this night, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. Verse 35. Peter said unto him, Though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples. They all of them said, Hey, we want none of us to deny you. If you remember back in Luke, and we won't turn there, I don't guess, but Luke 22, I think it is, along in about 26, somewhere along in there, maybe a little later than that. Jesus tells Peter something. He said, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. You see, the devil would like to sift all of us as wheat. Everybody that's a Christian. He would like to sift, and not necessarily just if you ain't a Christian, because if he's got the lost, he's got them, but he wants to keep them. But sifting wheat, I brought some years back when I first came to Evergreen, I bought a flour sifter in here. And some of the older ones knew what it was, but most everybody, even some of them my age, and they didn't know what it was. I said, what is that? They ain't never seen nothing like that. But, y'all know what I'm talking about. Old flat. Mama always had one when I was growing up. That was to get rid of the bad stuff. Just stick with me for a minute. What God, the devil wanted to do with Peter? When you sifted somebody's wheat, the wheat took a beating. There was different ways to do it. Sometimes they would tie it up in bags and beat it. Let's play with a bat. You understand what a bat, with a stick or a pole. Sometimes, sometimes it was laid out on something, and they took a sled and they drove over it. It was to separate the chaff from the wheat itself. Now, that was bad for the chaff because it was just beat all to pieces, and not good for that. It was just thrown away. But it gave them wheat to eat. So what the devil wanted to do is he wanted to sift Peter like wheat, but he was talking about the chaff part and just tear. But what he didn't know, he was just removing the imperfections in Peter's life. And sometimes when we go through things in life, and we've all been there, been through things in life we wish we didn't have to face. But God just takes some time. Sometimes He's just taking the imperfections out, moving them out of the way where we can be better fruit or better servant or better for Him. It's hard to see that, but Jesus said, the Satan hath desired to sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you. I believe, and this, I think maybe He still prays on our behalf and to the Father and say, hey, do this for him or do this for her. I believe that. Now, the devil would want to destroy you. And that's his job. The thief comes not to steal, kill, and destroy. I mean, that's period. That's what he's come for. And he'd like to sift all of us this week. But he told Peter, I pray that thy faith fail not, and after thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. Peter was going to go on to be one of the greatest preachers of the New Testament, we'll say, with what he done, starting the first church, really, and the church, getting bigger and bigger from that point, from the day that Peter stood up and preached. But he went through a tough time. He went through a terrible time. Because the devil was hot on his trail, and the devil was trying to destroy him. Jesus is telling them this while he's going through the garden. So Jesus gets to the garden. Verse 36 in Matthew, verse 36. Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, and saith unto the disciples, sit ye here while I go yonder and pray. Jesus himself, talking about the importance of prayer. I mean, if Jesus himself had to go and pray, man, where does that leave you and I? We could never pray enough. We could never pray enough. Well, Jesus goes and he prays. Listen, man, let's look down in verse 38. Then saith he unto them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me. In other words, stay awake and pray is what he's pretty much telling them to. Stay awake and pray with me. I would never be able to, in my vocabulary, to explain to you, to express to you what Jesus went through this night. We've probably never seen a man that was in so much turmoil and trouble as what he was that night for you and I now. Nothing that he did. He said he was exceedingly sorrowful. In fact, one place, at one place it says his sweat became as it were great drops of blood. And I heard people teach it's blood, and I don't believe that, but that's just my thoughts. It says as it were great drops. But what I do get out of that is, I don't know if anybody's ever had an open wound that bled terribly, but I have. I mean, I've had one in my head one time. Just a matter of, it was just everywhere till they could get it stopped. But when you start sweating like that now, that's like pouring water off of you. I mean, it was unreal what he went through. But he prayed and he sought God. And the Bible says one place he went and he fell on his feet, on his hands, and I just believe he just cried out to God like you could, like we can't imagine. Verse 39. And he went a little further and fell on his face. That's where I get that, and prayed, saying, oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. This is the reason he was born. This is the reason he come into this life. Sure, he didn't want to face that. Nobody else in here ever want to face it. It weren't altogether the fear of dying, because if he was going to die on Friday and be back on Sunday, that's not a long time. But it was other things. He was going to take on, well, three things: sin, sorrow, separation. He was going to take on. Well, he didn't have sin, but he had a cup that he drank out of. We'll say, let's just think about a cup for a minute. If you could just fill a cup up with all types of diseases and just all types of things, you know where germs are nowadays. Would you be willing to drink it? That's what he did. He wasn't, not that he was maybe never sick, but he took on the sin that caused sickness. Now, if Adam and Eve would have lived in a perfect world, there would have been no sickness. I think Adam and Eve would have lived forever if they'd have done what. That's just my thinking. If they'd have done what they're supposed to do, but because they didn't, that's when death come in. That's when sickness come in. That's when the problems and struggles of life that they started having come in. It only came after. So Jesus is taking on all the sin of mankind from Adam on up through the end of time before Jesus comes to get the church. He was taking on all that sin. And that was the cup. He was saying, if there's any other way, God, let this cup pass from me. If there's any other way for to be made, restitution for me made for man, and for that sin debt to be paid, if there's any other way, let it pass from me. But not my will, but thy will be done. Jesus did this 3 times. 3 times he went and he got on his face. And I think he cried out to God, and with the sweat and all. And his clothes would have been saturated from that much sweat. He prayed it 3 times. I've told you often about 3. I haven't mentioned it lately. We've seen the three times in this text alone this morning. 3 in Hebrew means finality. Now, I've told you that over and over and over, and I'll explain myself quickly on it, and then I'll move on. Hunter, if I want to buy something from you, say a guitar. No, you got them. We'll say a guitar, and you say, hey, it's not for sale. So I wait a little bit, and I go back, and I say, Hunter, I really would like to have that guitar. And you say, hey, it's not for sale. And I wait a little bit, and I go back a third time and say, Hunter, man, I got the money. I really want that guitar. And you say it's not for sale. But the third time he tells me that, I know not to ever go back, because that means he'd never sell it. Does that make sense to you? So when Jesus is praying, and in Hebrew, that's what it meant. And so that's what it meant when Jesus went and he prayed 3 times. It was God's final answer. Hey, listen, Jesus, there's no other way. This is the only way for me to put my only son on a cross to die for the sins of this world and to pay that sin. It's the only way. And Jesus said, even one place he said the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. We often use that. I don't know if we really got the right to, so to speak. We're not where Jesus was at, but still we often say, my spirit's willing, but my flesh is weak. And I know we get there. We all do. But 3 times Jesus prayed this prayer. And every time he would come back, he'd find them sleeping. He'd find them asleep. And he said, you couldn't just watch 1 hour. It's so easy to tell people, because I've been there, they got a problem. Richard David, I said, well, I'll pray for you and that kind of stuff. And then sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We've all been guilty of that. But it's because we're not in the trouble and the problems that whoever asked us to pray for is. Peter wasn't in trouble yet. He didn't know it, but it was coming. But it wasn't here yet. And he got tired and he got sleepy and he laid down and went to sleep. And he did that 3 times that he went to sleep. Let's look on down in verse 47. I think it is. And while he yet spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came with him a great multitude with swords and staffs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Verse 48. Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, whomsoever I shall kiss, the same as he, hold him fast. Next verse. And forthwith he came to Jesus and said, hail, master, and kissed him. This Judas is where Judas betrayed him. He betrays him with a kiss. Verse 50. And Jesus said unto him, friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. Verse 51. And behold, one of them which wherewith Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant's eye, and struck a servant of the high priest's ear and smote off his ear. Now, if you go to other places in the Bible, we know this is Peter that did this. So, for a split second there, Peter was ready to fight for a split second there. I mean, he just was. I mean, we see where he done that. What we know from other versions of the Bible that Peter cut off the man's right ear, which would very much say to us that Peter was a left-handed guy, more or less. If he'd been standing face to face and you cut somebody's right ear off, probably would have been with his left hand. Possibly. I mean, he was willing to fight there for just a second. But when we're not going God's way, we're really going the wrong way. And that weren't Jesus' intentions. That weren't Peter's battle. But for a split second, he cut his ear off. I don't know. I said something earlier about going back to the garden. I've thought it all week kind of funny to me. Adam and Eve was in the garden, and Eve listened to the snake, what the snake had to say. But here's Peter in the garden, and he cuts his ear off where you couldn't hear what they say. Y'all might not see that yet. You might, after a little while, you'll see it. I just thought that's kind of funny to me in a way. How did she listen and went back in the same scenario in the garden, and Peter cuts off the ear of the enemy. In other words, he don't listen to him, he cuts his ear off. Go ahead. If you look back, they said they had 2 swords with them. Now, they had that. I really believe they had that at the Last Supper. I didn't say that, but I'm pretty confident I've read that they were actually, and they had 2. Because Jesus had told them prior to this, actually while they were walking, that before he'd sent them out without purse and without clothes, he said, from here out, you need to take this stuff with you because things are going to be different. And I believe the sword is mentioned in that context, in that text there, what I'm telling you here. And because they even asked Jesus, they even asked Jesus prior to this, they had 2 swords, they could fight for him. They even said that now you got to read all 4 Gospels to get that. You can't just pull it out of one and get everything you need. But they even, and Jesus said, no, that pretty much, that ain't my end. He said, I've got a way to go. I've got something I've got to do, more or less. And that ain't in it. Fighting and bringing and drawing a sword ain't in it. But I mean, I'm thinking they may have thought they'd have been going to use them, is why they took them, because of Jesus, somebody coming to get Jesus. I mean, I believe that's possible. But Jesus tells Peter in verse 52. One more verse. Then said Jesus unto him, put again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. In other words, Jesus said, this is not what I want. In verse 53, he says, and he have called, and thinkest thou not that I cannot pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels. Legions I've heard anywhere from 1,000 to almost 7,000, 68, 26. I mean, it depends on where you get it from and who's using it. But it could have been as much as 6,800, I think 6,826 men. But some say 1,000. But it could range up to that point. I mean, he could have called and fought, but he didn't do that. He willingly was going to go to the cross for me and for you, for our sins. That was his whole purpose. That was his whole mission. Unless there's time run out for him. No, just like one day, unless there's time's running out for us. You're getting older every day. I mean, Jesus is coming soon. If not, if he don't come before, we're not going to live forever. The only thing we can do is be ready, know him as Lord and Savior of our life, and be ready to leave, because nobody knows when he's coming. It could be the day before church is out. It could be the night. It could be this week. We don't know. Just the only thing you can do is be ready. Just be ready. Well, let's look down at verse 57. I'll go just another minute or two. I didn't get far as I wanted to, but so we know that when they go to arrest Jesus, that Jesus actually, if we learn from all the Gospels, you got to read them all, but that actually Jesus come out and told them, hey, here I am. And the second time Jesus told them that, they went backwards. We see within his power just fell to the ground. Did you read that in the Gospels? How in the world they could have arrested the man after? I mean, what about a man reaching down and putting somebody's ear back on? I mean, how can you just deny that man not being of God? I mean, how could you deny that? But still, it happened. It happened because it was God's plan to send him for us. And when they laid, verse 57, and they that had laid hold on Jesus led him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But the preacher's text last week, but Peter followed him afar off unto the high priest's palace, and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. I almost just taught that one little phrase there this morning. I didn't. To see the end. Jesus' end on this earth for you and I. I mean, it was good for you and I, but it weren't good all that he had to go through. He wanted to see what was going to happen to him. He was going to see what they were going to do to him, how they were going to handle him, how they were going to treat him. I mean, he just, no doubt he knew he was going to die, and he didn't know he was going to come back to life. He didn't grasp that part yet, but I believe by this point. I believe by this point that Peter knew that Jesus was going to die. I believe that in some shape, form, or fashion. I believe he knew that. Or he wouldn't have said that's why he come in there. He come to see the end. The end's coming. Now the end came here for Jesus, and he went to that cross and he hung on the cross between the heavens and the earth and died for my sins and your sins and the sins of this world. That's true. But that weren't the end of it. Thank God he rose on the third day. And he's sitting at the right hand of the Father, making intercession for you and I. I'm thankful for that. But everything as we know it will come to an end. This life will come to an end. Now, the time for Jesus to return, it will come to an end. It's coming. And it's coming fast. But he sat there, he went in to see the end. Verse 69. And I'll give me another minute or two, and I know I'm not done, but I'll quit. Now Peter sat without in the palace, and a damsel came to him, saying, Thou also was with Jesus of Galilee. So she accuses him. Said, hey, and it's amazing to me here, something here, and I ain't got the answer to this, but it's really amazing to me that it was a woman in their society that accused Peter first of being. Now, you may not understand that, but trust me, that amazes me. I mean, they weren't really able to be talkative in public, talking to especially the strange men that they weren't married to. I mean, that was just that you didn't do that. Listen, you don't do that over there in some places now. When I was involved in Desert Storm, I had to go to classes on what you could and could not do in the Middle East, and that was one of them. You didn't talk with women. Period. None. There was other things you didn't do, but that's one thing you stayed away from it. And this we're talking about over 2,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago now. I mean, it's just amazing to me. And chances are that at least two of them were women, possibly. But they the one said something to Peter, and Peter denied him. But according to the Bible, he still hadn't really thought about what he was saying. Not really. You got to read the whole text, and we can't because of time. But then he denied him a second time. And says he don't know him. And then he denied him a third time. What did I just tell you a few minutes ago about finality? That was his final answer. I don't know him. But he cursed and he swore that time, according to the Bible. He did both. In other words, he really meant he didn't want nobody to know. He just drawed a sword, 2 hours ago, whatever. He just drew a sword and cut a servant's ear off. And now he denies he even know him. And this, not only that, from what I can gather, you got to read all four Gospels again, and we didn't have time. One of those times and I think the last time that Jerry that Peter denied Jesus, he could see Jesus. It's in there. You'd have to look it up and tell you, but it's there. And he looks at Jesus, and he remembered. It don't say he remembered until he got to the third time. I mean, saying he didn't, but I'm just telling you what the Bible says. There's a lot of times people do things not thinking. I've been there. I woke up in places I didn't know why I done what I done. I mean, I'm just telling you, I have. And here Peter, he denies him the third time, and he's looking at Jesus. And he done the only thing he could do. At that time, he went out and wept bitterly. He left and pretty much right after that went back to fishing, what he'd always done. Until Jesus met him later, and we'll see in the end of John 20, I think it is. We'll see where where they come back together, and Jesus talks to the disciples and to Peter. John is the only one we see that goes. John actually went in at this place. John went in the palace. He knew the high priest. John was more or less, from what I can gather, he was a fisherman, but he must have been kind of a I don't say not politics. That's not the word I'm looking for. But he must have knew a lot of people in those areas, and must have had a lot of connections to be able to do what he'd done, and to go in there. That's often what I think about John, and yes, that's correct. That's great. You got to read all four Gospels to get that, because only one of them tells you that they knew John, and John went back to the door and went to the high priest, and he come back out to the door and asked the woman keeping the door to let Peter in, from what I can gather from all four Gospels. It's just, I hate to read that much to you, because I mean, I don't want to bore you, and I know it ain't been the best in the world, but I'm trying to tell you it all in a story in a timely manner. But when Peter went out and done the only thing he can do, he wept bitterly. That's all they could do. We don't see Peter no more for a while. We see John at the cross, but we don't see Peter no more till later on in the book of John, after Jesus is resurrected, or after when he's resurrected. We see Peter. Next week, Lord willing, Easter Sunday, Daddy's supposed to teach us. He's always taught Easter for me ever since I've taught this class. He's always taught Easter, especially Easter and Christmas. He likes it, so Easter and Christmas. And I don't know what he's going to teach this year. I mean, I know it'll be on the resurrection or whatever, but I'm going to, my thing is next week to get Jesus on the cross. I believe next Sunday's Palm Sunday. Is that right? We got one more Sunday. Is it next Sunday, Palm Sunday? So I'll try to maybe go through some of his trial. What happened, just so you'll know some information, just stuff you'll know what he went through for you and for me, and get him up to the cross, and Daddy's going to teach Easter Sunday, resurrection. Anybody got a question or comment? Anything? Nobody? Everybody good? Yes, sir. Right. Right, that's correct.